I'm standing in my own kitchen after 18 months in Afghanistan, and the first words out of my mouth are, "Get out of my house." There's a woman at the stove, casually cooking with my grandmother's cast iron skillet, the one I inherited after she passed. Her husband is stretched out on my couch like he belongs there. Their kids freeze mid-bite at my dining table, forks hovering in the air. "Excuse me," she says, looking at me like I'm the one trespassing. "This is my house." I reply slowly. "Those are my dishes." She reaches into a folder and pulls out paperwork. "We pay rent to Margaret Whitfield. We live here legally." And right on cue, Margaret herself walks through my front door. White Lexus parked in my driveway. Designer handbag hanging from her arm. That same smug, self-satisfied smile. "Jake," she says sweetly, "you're back earlier than expected. Property abandonment requires proper HOA procedure." Abandonment? I repeat, I was deployed. "Well," she shrugs lightly, "you should follow protocol." I stare at her face, that confident, entitled expression, and for the first time in months, I smile, because she has absolutely no idea what she just set in motion. By tomorrow, this entire neighborhood is going to learn exactly what happens when you steal from the wrong soldier. Stick around. Things are about to get very interesting. What would you do if someone stole your house while you were overseas serving your country? Let me introduce you to Margaret Whitfield, the type of woman who measures her lawn with a ruler and times how long your Christmas decorations stay up after New Year's Day. Margaret is 52, drives a white Lexus SUV that smells faintly of vanilla air freshener and desperation, and she's been HOA president for 6 consecutive years. Mostly because nobody else wants the job, which honestly should have warned us something wasn't right. She carries that specific flavor of suburban entitlement you only get from binge-watching home renovation shows and convincing yourself you're the star of one. Before becoming the neighborhood dictator, Margaret worked in real estate, past tense, because the state revoked her license over creative contract interpretations. Translation: she misrepresented structural issues, concealed water damage, and somehow her commission always ended up mysteriously higher than agreed upon. The sound of her heels clicking across courthouse tile became very familiar to her former clients. After her divorce, Margaret managed to keep the biggest house in Sunset Hills, a sprawling Mediterranean-style monstrosity with more square footage than taste. The problem was maintaining an Instagram-worthy lifestyle requires actual income, not just alimony payments that had recently stopped arriving. That's where I came in. My name is Jake Brennan, third-generation Army. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 8, I grew up in foster care, bouncing between houses until I enlisted at 18. I wanted something permanent, something that was mine. When I bought my house at 28 using a VA loan, it was the first thing I had ever truly owned. It's a simple 3-bedroom ranch. Nothing flashy, but every improvement came from my own hands. The garage smells like motor oil and possibility. That's where I restore vintage motorcycles on weekends. The clean metallic click of socket wrenches, the sharp chemical scent of penetrating oil breaking through decades of rust, flakes of corrosion falling away to reveal chrome underneath. Those bikes taught me something important. Broken things can come back to life. When deployment orders for Afghanistan came in January 2023, I handled everything by the book: automatic payments for the mortgage, utilities, HOA dues. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Fiona, 70 years old, still baking snickerdoodles for every new family, to collect my mail and keep an eye on things. I even attended the January HOA meeting before leaving, specifically informing the board about my 18-month deployment. Margaret sat there nodding, taking notes, asking about emergency contacts and property upkeep. She seemed genuinely concerned about a soldier heading overseas. I should have recognized a predator evaluating her next opportunity. 3 months later, Margaret noticed my grass getting slightly long. Mrs. Fiona was doing her best, but she's 70 and my lawn mower weighs almost as much as she does. Instead of offering help like a decent human being, Margaret slapped a violation notice on my front door. The adhesive left a sticky residue that probably still hasn't come off. When no response came, which is hard to provide while you're dodging mortar fire in Kandahar, Margaret escalated to abandon property proceedings. She dug up an obscure HOA clause claiming homes vacant more than 90 days without formal board notification could be temporarily managed for community benefit. Somehow, my deployment notification disappeared from the official meeting minutes. Funny how that works. By June, Margaret had listed my house on Craigslist for $2,800 a month. She moved in the Rodriguez family. Maria, a nurse who smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Carlos, whose handshake felt like honest labor. And twins Sophia and Diego, whose laughter deserved a home that actually belonged to them. Margaret fed them a story about foreclosure and abandonment. Fake documents. Whatever lies made the theft seem legitimate. She pocketed more than $8,000 in deposits and first month's rent, straight into her personal account, while I earned combat pay under Taliban fire. For 4 months, Margaret lived off my stolen property, like a parasite feeding on my absence. But deployments end, and sometimes soldiers don't come home alone. My first stop after landing stateside was the HOA office, deployment orders, bank statements, and 18 months of bottled-up rage in hand. Margaret's office smelled like synthetic vanilla and financial panic. She sat behind an oversized desk covered in real estate magazines and Cabo vacation brochures. Interesting how someone managing community funds could afford dreams of Mexican beaches. "Jake, what a surprise," she said, though her expression suggested she'd been expecting me. I slid my paperwork across the desk. 18 months deployed. Every bill auto-paid. Want to explain why strangers are living in my house? Margaret studied the documents like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. There was a matter of property abandonment, she said. You failed to follow proper notification procedures. I attended the January meeting. You took notes. I don't recall formal notification. She opened a filing cabinet and produced certified mail receipts. We sent multiple letters regarding the 90-day abandonment clause. The postmarks looked suspiciously fresh, that crisp stamped look you get when someone backdates paperwork. During deployment, I'd learned to recognize forged documents from local contractors trying to scam hazard pay. Same tells, clean edges, ink inconsistencies, dates that didn't align. These are fake, I said. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Her confidence said everything. She believed she built an airtight narrative, fabricated evidence, legal-sounding justification, counting on a traumatized veteran to accept defeat rather than fight bureaucracy. Huge mistake. I spent 2 days at the county recorder's office surrounded by the dusty smell of archive files and the soft shuffle of decades-old paperwork. My grandfather used to say, when someone's lying, the truth is usually written down somewhere. He'd fought crooked landlords after Vietnam. Paper trails don't lie. People do. Margaret had never filed abandonment paperwork with the county. The rental income never appeared in HOA financial reports. And the biggest problem for her? The so-called 90-day abandonment clause didn't exist anywhere in the actual HOA bylaws. At Veterans Legal Aid, attorney Sarah Rodriguez spread my evidence across her desk like a winning poker hand. This isn't just fraud, she said, pen clicking for emphasis. This is document forgery, theft, and a violation of the Service Member Civil Relief Act. Federal prosecutors love cases like this. Then Margaret made her first tactical mistake. Instead of backing off, she escalated. Suddenly, the Rodriguez family started receiving harassment citations. Maria got written up for excessive vehicle idling when warming her car before hospital shifts. Carlos received violations for unauthorized mechanical work after changing his oil in the driveway. Margaret was trying to evict the only witnesses to her scam. Then came the neighborhood email. Subject line, safety concerns in Sunset Hills. Margaret painted me as an unstable veteran with PTSD, conducting surveillance against innocent families. She even included photos of me documenting my own property as evidence. The smear campaign might have worked, except Margaret forgot about Mrs. Fiona. My 70-year-old neighbor had quietly observed everything for months. When the email arrived, she forwarded it to every military family in the subdivision with one sentence. This woman is lying about Jake. I saw everything. My phone exploded. Tom Harrison, Marine veteran from Maple Street, called first. We got your 6, brother. Whatever you need. Within hours, Margaret's narrative began collapsing. Neighbors started apologizing, offering help. The community she thought she controlled was turning against her. That's when desperation set in. Thursday night, 8 p.m. Margaret showed up at my door holding a cashier's check for $5,000. Her makeup was smudged, hands slightly shaking. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said. "Perhaps we can resolve this quietly." I looked at the check. Less than half of what she stole. "Margaret, you took $11,000 from a deployed soldier, forged documents, violated federal law, and you think $5,000 fixes this?" Her voice cracked. "I was trying to help the community. You were helping yourself to my house." The irony? She had just confessed on camera. My security system, installed the day I got home, recorded everything. Combat teaches you to always have backup plans and backup evidence. Margaret thought she was buying off a broken soldier. Instead, she handed me a recorded confession. I gave the check back. "Keep it. I want every dollar returned, damages, your resignation, and a public apology to the family you harassed." Her face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning mood ring. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious." She clutched her knockoff designer purse tighter. "You'll regret this, Jake. I have resources." Apparently those resources included a discount private investigator who looked like he learned surveillance from binge-watching crime shows. Within days, this guy was parked across from my house in a rusted Honda, taking photos with pawnshop equipment. Margaret's plan was obvious: discredit me when she couldn't defend herself. What she didn't know was my former squad leader, Tony Reeves, was visiting that weekend. 3 Iraq deployments, spotting insurgent surveillance teams. Amateur hour stood out like a neon sign. "Want me to talk to him?" Tony asked, cracking his knuckles. "Better idea," I said. "Let's give him a show." Saturday we staged the most suspicious scenario possible. Dark sunglasses, duffel bag, phone calls about deliveries, equipment talk. The investigator followed Tony to Home Depot where he bought zip ties, duct tape, and plastic sheeting. Perfectly innocent renovation supplies that looked terrifying through paranoid eyes. By Sunday, the investigator was convinced he'd uncovered a criminal operation and called the police himself. 2 deputies arrived expecting something illegal. Instead, they found Tony installing my bathroom faucet while I organized tools. Zip ties for electrical cables, duct tape for HVAC sealing, plastic sheeting protecting floors. Deputy Martinez later told Margaret, "Hiring unlicensed investigators to stalk neighbors and filing false reports is actually criminal." Turns out the investigator lost his license 3 years earlier. Margaret's intimidation attempt backfired, and now she faced harassment complaints herself. But she still wasn't done digging. Daily neighborhood emails escalated, accusing me of being everything from unstable veteran to domestic threat, stockpiling weapons, legally owned hunting rifles, conducting paramilitary exercises, motorcycle repairs, threatening safety, existing while military. What Margaret forgot was neighborhoods change. 3 military families had moved in during my deployment. Tom Harrison organized a veteran support network. Mrs. Fiona became our unofficial intelligence hub. Her smear campaign hit a wall of people who knew better. Then came her fatal mistake. Margaret started backdating HOA meeting minutes, creating fake votes authorizing her abandoned property rental program. She thought fabricated paperwork would legitimize everything after the fact. Afghanistan taught me otherwise. Paper trails don't lie. Only people do. Attorney Sarah subpoenaed the original HOA records from off-site storage. Those documents told a story Margaret never expected anyone to read. No abandonment discussion. No rental authorization. No board votes. Nothing connected to my house. Margaret hadn't just committed fraud. She compounded it with forgery, obstruction, and multiple felonies. "She's basically written a federal case study on how to ruin your own life," Sarah said. Evidence spread across her table like battle plans. Local prosecutors to the FBI. Everyone is jurisdiction. The irony was almost poetic. Margaret started this war thinking she was dealing with one isolated, traumatized soldier who would roll over instead of fighting back. Instead, She awakened an entire network of veterans, men and women who had learned the same lessons about preparation, documentation, and never leaving someone behind. Margaret wanted to play dirty. She just forgot some of us had graduate-level experience in asymmetric warfare. The real lesson was about to begin. Margaret's next move crossed the boundary from fraud into outright insanity. At 2:47 a.m. Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with security alert. The camera feed showed a figure in designer yoga pants creeping across my backyard like a suburban commando. Margaret Whitfield, HOA president and aspiring felon, was breaking into my garage carrying a small plastic bag. The infrared footage captured everything with crystal clarity. Her fumbling with my tool cabinet, carefully placing something behind my motorcycle lift, the nervous glance over her shoulder before slipping back into the darkness. The sharp burn of adrenaline mixed with ice-cold fury as I watched her plant evidence in real time. In Afghanistan, we used similar surveillance technology to catch insurgents planting roadside explosives. Same motion triggers, same night vision clarity, same certainty when you know you've got someone dead to rights. The difference was insurgents usually knew they were being hunted. Margaret was so arrogant she forgot soldiers always watch their six. I waited exactly 90 seconds after she disappeared, then called 911. This is Jake Brennan at 1247 Sunset Hills Drive. My security system just recorded someone breaking into my garage and planning what appears to be narcotics. I need officers immediately. Units arrived within minutes. Margaret's white Lexus pulled up almost simultaneously, Hollywood-level timing. She had clearly planned to discover the drugs during a convenient HOA inspection and play the concerned citizen reporting criminal behavior. Instead, she got to watch Officer Martinez examine a baggie of crushed Adderall while my security footage played on his body cam. "Ma'am," Martinez said, voice dripping with that specific contempt reserved for truly foolish criminals, "we have clear video of you committing breaking and entering, planting evidence, and attempting to frame a military veteran. You're under arrest for multiple felonies." The metallic click of handcuffs closing around Margaret's wrists echoed through the night, like justice locking into place. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black streaks as reality crashed over her. But Margaret's arrest was only the opening act. Neighborhood security footage showing the HOA president being walked to a patrol car from a veteran's driveway detonated across local Facebook groups like Napalm. Within hours, clips of her midnight drug planning adventure were shared, screenshot, and turned into memes that spread across Riverside County like wildfire. The real explosion happened when other residents found their courage. Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old, revealed Margaret had taken $1,200 for emergency roof repairs that never happened. The Garcia family discovered they'd been paying inflated landscaping fees to Margaret's brother that never appeared in HOA records. The Johnsons had paid $800 in special assessments that went directly into Margaret's personal account. A pattern emerged. Margaret had been targeting vulnerable residents for years, elderly widows, deployed military families, anyone unlikely to fight back. We hadn't just tolerated a corrupt HOA president. We'd been living under an organized scam disguised as suburban governance. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh held a press conference that turned Margaret's mugshot into the face of HOA corruption statewide. The systematic fraud targeting military families represents exactly the kind of predatory conduct we will prosecute to the fullest extent of federal law, Walsh announced, holding in large copies of Margaret's forged paperwork. Margaret's bail conditions read like a restraining order against her own life. No contact with Sunset Hills residents. Immediate suspension from HOA authority. Prohibited from entering the neighborhood, except for court appearances. The woman who had ruled our streets with petty tyranny was now banned from her own kingdom. But Margaret's desperation reached new levels of stupidity from her jail cell. 3 days later, her attorney showed up at my door with a settlement offer that would have sounded generous, if it wasn't essentially a bribe. $25,000, more than double what she stole, plus legal fees, plus a non-disclosure agreement requiring me to stop cooperating with federal prosecutors. Mrs. Whitfield would like to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind everyone, the lawyer said, sweating through a cheap suit like he knew he was delivering ransom demands for a sinking ship. I looked at the papers, then at Sarah Rodriguez, who was practically vibrating with suppressed laughter. "Tell Margaret she can use that hush money as toilet paper in federal prison," I said. "I don't take bribes to cover up crimes." The irony was beautiful. Attempting to buy my silence constituted witness tampering, another federal felony added to Margaret's growing collection. Sarah forwarded the offer directly to D.A. Walsh, who promptly added obstruction of justice and witness intimidation to the charges. Margaret had escalated from theft to evidence planting to attempted bribery in less than 2 weeks. She was about to learn some wars only in one way. The truth hit me like shrapnel from an IED. Sudden, violent, impossible to ignore. I was sitting in Sarah Rodriguez's office, surrounded by banker boxes smelling of old paper and bureaucratic neglect, cross-referencing Margaret's fake bylaws against the original 1987 HOA, founding documents. Afternoon sunlight streamed through dusty windows as I flipped through brittle yellow pages. That's when I found a letter that changed everything. Dated 3 weeks after I received deployment orders 18 months earlier, Margaret had written to the HOA's legal counsel asking about procedures for managing vacant properties during extended homeowner absence. Her handwriting was precise, calculated, like someone planning a heist. The attorney's reply made my blood run cold. HOA has no legal authority to rent, manage, or control privately owned homes regardless of owner absence duration. Any such action would constitute criminal trespass and grand theft. Margaret had received professional legal advice explaining exactly why her plan was felony-level illegal, and she proceeded anyway. My hands shook as realization settled in. This wasn't opportunistic theft or confusion over HOA authority. Margaret had planned to steal my house before I even left for Afghanistan. Financial records showed she researched rental rates on my street 2 months before deployment. Contacted property management companies, driven past my house taking photos, and notes about rental appeal. While I prepared to serve my country, Margaret prepared to rob me. The discovery that made me physically sick came from insurance documents buried deep in another box. 2 years earlier, Margaret had filed a fraudulent $8,000 vandalism claim on community property. The payout went to repairs performed by her brother's company, work that never happened. The bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth. Margaret hadn't just targeted me. She'd been defrauding the entire neighborhood for years. Every elderly neighbor, every military family, every fake assessment, every fraudulent insurance claim. An organized criminal operation hiding behind HOA authority. Sarah's voice cut through my anger. "Jake, look at this." She handed me printouts from Margaret C.'s laptop, a spreadsheet labeled target assessment. Every military family in Sunset Hills was listed. Deployment schedules, property values, vulnerability ratings. Elderly residents marked with notes like confused and isolated. Frequent travelers documented with absence patterns. My name sat at the top. 18-month deployment confirmed. Property value $340,000. Rental potential $2,800 per month. Perfect target. No family support. Isolated extended. Absence. Being reduced to a profit calculation by someone I trusted with neighborhood security made my vision blur with rage. Margaret hadn't seen me as a neighbor serving his country. I was livestock to harvest. "This is federal racketeering territory," Sarah said, voice tight with anger. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, organized criminal enterprise." Margaret's looking at decades. The irony was perfect. Her obsessive record-keeping, the same habit that drove her to document fake bylaws and forge signatures, had created an airtight federal case against herself. She thought she was hunting one vulnerable soldier. Instead, she'd been constructing her own prison sentence, one crime at a time. The first truck rolled into my driveway at 0630 Saturday morning. Tony Reeves in his lifted F-250, diesel rumbling like distant thunder through suburban silence. "Figured you might need backup, brother," he said, crushing my hand with a grip, still carrying 3 tours' worth of calluses. By Sunday evening, my garage had transformed into an unofficial veterans reunion center. The rich smell of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee and determination as former squad members arrived from across the country. Mike Fiona drove down from Sacramento with surveillance gear straight out of a spy movie. Danny Walsh flew in from Phoenix, carrying legal documents and barely contained rage. Carlos Mendez took emergency leave from San Diego, arriving with a cooler of beer and stories that made Margaret's fraud look amateur. The sound of military voices discussing tactics drifted through the neighborhood like psychological warfare. Margaret noticed immediately. Her morning walks turned into nervous speed marches as she spotted license plates from multiple states and heard the unmistakable cadence of veteran conversations echoing from my backyard. The metallic clink of tools, the scent of penetrating oil, the low rumble of engines being tuned, sounds of competence, organization, patience. Who are all those men? Margaret asked Mrs. Fiona near the mailboxes one morning, voice pitched higher than normal. Jake's army friends, Fiona replied sweetly. Such polite boys. They'd been asking fascinating questions about neighborhood history. The pressure was subtle, but razor sharp. Margaret began peeking through blinds each morning, counting vehicles. Sometimes 3 trucks, sometimes 7, sometimes none. The unpredictability ate at her nerves like waiting for incoming mortar rounds. Meanwhile, my legal artillery positioned for impact. Sarah connected me with a federal prosecutor specializing in crimes against military victims, former Marine David Park. Enhanced sentencing applies when criminals target military families. Park explained calmly, your case is textbook predatory conduct. We're talking decades, not years. In Afghanistan, I learned the best operations combine multiple moving parts into one decisive strike. This was no different. Tom Harrison organized community security meetings, conveniently held in my garage, while 8 combat veterans discussed property protection strategies. Mrs. Fiona became our intelligence coordinator, tracking Margaret's movements with professional dedication. She's making lots of phone calls in her backyard. Fiona reported during coffee briefings, always looking around like someone's listening. Someone was. Mike Fiona upgraded my security system with thermal imaging, facial recognition, and audio pickup sensitive enough to catch whispers through closed windows. Every visitor logged, every call duration noted, every behavior pattern analyzed. Margaret's paranoia reached peak levels when she tried hiring private security. The company she contacted, Rodriguez Protective Services, happened to belong to my attorney's brother-in-law, who immediately forwarded the request. Margaret wanted protection from military intimidation and veteran harassment. The company responded professionally. Ma'am, we provide protection from actual threats, not legal consequences. You may wish to consult better legal counsel. By week 2, Margaret's confidence had shattered into barely controlled panic. New locks appeared overnight. Floodlights surrounded her property like a prison compound. Motion cameras sprouted from every corner. Her routines became erratic, different routes, irregular schedules, constant glances behind her. The woman who once strutted through the neighborhood now moved from shadow to shadow. The most beautiful part? Everything we did was completely legal. Veterans visiting a friend, neighbors taking walks, security equipment on private property, community meetings about HOA governance. Nothing illegal. But everything reminded Margaret she was surrounded by people who understood patience, planning, and pressure. Margaret had declared war on one isolated soldier. She was about to learn what happens when you attack someone whose brothers consider abandonment an unacceptable concept. The real offensive was about to begin. Margaret's first panic attack hit at 7:43 a.m. Tuesday morning, right there in her driveway for the entire neighborhood to witness. Mrs. Fiona called me instantly, her voice buzzing with excitement through my phone speaker. Jake, you need to see this. Margaret just ran outside in her bathrobe, spinning around counting trucks like she's lost her mind. I stepped onto my porch to watch the spectacle unfold. Margaret stood barefoot on the asphalt, hyperventilating while pointing at military vehicles parked throughout the neighborhood. The cold morning air carried the sound of her ragged breathing and frantic counting. 1, 2, 3, 4 trucks. For different trucks. What she was actually seeing was Tony's F-250 parked legally along the curb. Mike's Silverado in my driveway. Danny's Jeep visiting the Harrisons 2 houses down. Carlos's Toyota helping Mrs. Patterson with yard work. Completely innocent activity that looked like a tactical perimeter through paranoid eyes. The metallic taste of satisfaction filled my mouth as Margaret stumbled back inside, slamming doors hard enough to rattle windows. After months of terrorizing vulnerable neighbors, she was finally experiencing fear herself. The beauty was our complete legal compliance. During deployment, I learned the most effective psychological operations never cross legal lines. They simply allow guilty people to unravel under their own paranoia. Margaret's desperation escalated Wednesday afternoon when she called police reporting military harassment and intimidation by veterans stalking her property. Deputies Martinez and Wong arrived to find what looked like a neighborhood barbecue in progress. The rich smell of grilled burgers mixed with motor oil and normal conversation as Tony washed his truck while debating fantasy football with Danny. Mike installed perfectly legal security, lighting on my garage. Carlos helped Mrs. Fiona carry groceries, the kind of neighborly support that strengthens communities. Ma'am, Deputy Martinez told Margaret after speaking with everyone, these individuals are engaged in lawful activities on private property. Being a military veteran isn't grounds for a restraining order. Margaret's voice cracked with hysteria. But they're coordinating. They watch my house. They're planning something. You mean they talk to each other and pay attention to their neighborhood? Martinez replied calmly. That's called being good neighbors. The police visit backfired, so badly Margaret might as well have lit a flare over her own head. Word spread through veteran networks faster than wildfire. Margaret Whitfield had attempted to weaponize law enforcement against military families. My phone exploded with calls from guys I hadn't spoken to in years, all offering to visit if I needed extra community support. Margaret's second catastrophic mistake was demanding the HOA management company intervene against what she called a military invasion of Sunset Hills. The irony was exquisite. A woman facing federal charges for HOA corruption was trying to use HOA authority to silence witnesses. The management company's response arrived via certified mail and community bulletin posting. Margaret Whitfield is immediately suspended from all HOA duties pending resolution of criminal charges. She is no longer authorized to represent or act on behalf of the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association. Her suburban dictatorship was officially dead, but losing authority only pushed her deeper into hysteria. Mike Fiona's upgraded surveillance system captured fragments of increasingly frantic phone calls, Margaret ranting about military conspiracies and revenge plots. The cruel irony was her imagination was inventing violent scenarios that existed only in her guilty conscience. What she believed were tactical meetings were actually discussions about legal strategy, witness coordination, and evidence organization. We weren't planning violence. We were planning justice, which apparently terrified her more than anything physical ever could. When Margaret hired another private investigator to document military harassment, we decided to give her something worth billing hours for. Tony organized morning calisthenics in my backyard, perfectly legal exercise that photographed like paramilitary training. Danny conducted perimeter walks, actually evening check-ins on elderly neighbors that looked ominous through paranoid interpretation. The PI's report read like paranoid fiction. Subject coordinates with multiple military-trained individuals in activities consistent with pre-operational surveillance and tactical preparation. What he had actually documented was veterans helping neighbors and maintaining property. Margaret's attorney received the report and immediately advised plea negotiations. Your behavior is deteriorating, he warned during a phone conversation our equipment captured clearly. The prosecution will use this paranoia to demonstrate consciousness of guilt. Margaret's scream echoed through her house. I'm not paranoid. They are watching me. She was half right. We were watching. The difference was everything we did was legal, documented, and coordinated with federal prosecutors who value cooperative witnesses. Margaret was learning karma doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks doors open. By Thursday morning, her house had transformed into a fortress that practically screamed guilt. New cameras sprouted from every corner. Floodlights burned through the night, turning her yard into a prison compound. The sharp smell of fresh concrete filled the air as contractors installed reinforced locks strong enough to stop a tank. She's lost it. Tony said during our morning coffee briefing, watching Margaret pace behind her living room windows like a trapped animal. She hasn't slept in days. He was right. Her flawless suburban image had fractured into paranoid obsession. Designer clothes hung loosely on a shrinking frame. Dark circles under her eyes made her look exhausted and hollow. The confident swagger that once intimidated elderly neighbors had vanished, replaced by jerky movements and constant glances over her shoulder. The psychological pressure reached its peak when Margaret attempted to flee. Mike Fiona's surveillance cameras captured her loading suitcases into her Lexus at 3:17 a.m. Friday morning. Infrared footage showed multiple trips, financial documents, jewelry, valuables stuffed into the trunk. The metallic jingle of keys echoed to the pre-dawn silence as she prepared to abandon everything. That's when Deputy Martinez's patrol car appeared at the end of the street. Not coincidence. Federal prosecutors had anticipated exactly the scenario. Margaret's bail conditions prohibited leaving Riverside County without permission. Her midnight escape attempt violated those terms immediately. The taste of poetic justice filled the morning air as Martinez approached the Lexus. "Ma'am, where you headed at this hour?" "I'm visiting a friend," Margaret stammered. "With luggage for a permanent relocation?" "Step out of the vehicle." Her arrest for bail violation hit local news within hours. Footage of her being walked in designer pajamas while neighbors watched from windows became instant social media gold. The woman who once ruled Sunset Hills was now a public spectacle of desperation. But her downfall accelerated further when federal agents raided her home later that morning. The search warrant, based on additional financial crimes found on her computer, revealed the full scale of her operation. Agents carried out boxes of forged documents, fake invoices, and records showing years of systematic fraud. Margaret hadn't only targeted military families. She'd stolen from contractors, insurance companies, even elderly relatives. Neighbors gathered with coffee cups in hand, watching the FBI dismantle her life one evidence box at a time. The most damning discovery came from her personal safe. Over $47,000 in cash, proceeds from multiple schemes. Financial analysis later traced the money to stolen HOA funds, inflated contractor bills, and fraudulent insurance claims spanning 5 years. Margaret's attorney withdrew that same afternoon, citing irreconcilable differences and client conduct incompatible with effective representation. Translation: she'd become too toxic even for defense lawyers. From jail, Margaret made one last desperate gamble. She contacted a local news station claiming she was a victim of military harassment. The reporter initially sympathized with what sounded like a story about PTSD veterans terrorizing a suburban woman. That sympathy vanished after reviewing federal charges, evidence, and interviews with neighbors. The resulting news segment was brutal. HOA president's fraud scheme targets military families. Margaret's mugshot filled the screen while the reporter detailed her systematic exploitation of deployed service members and vulnerable residents. Mrs. Fiona delivered the most devastating quote. "Margaret Whitfield is a predator who used her position to steal from people who couldn't fight back. These veterans didn't harass her. They caught her." The story went viral within hours. Margaret became the national face of HOA corruption. Her mugshot spread across social media with captions about consequences and karma. She had wanted attention as a victim. Instead, she became a cautionary example. Federal sentencing guidelines now included enhanced penalties for targeting deployed service members. Margaret was facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Her war against one soldier had become a national case study. The emergency homeowners meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock p.m. Saturday, but residents began arriving early. The smell of burnt coffee and nervous energy filled the room as neighbors carried news articles, documents, and months of suppressed anger. Margaret arrived in handcuffs. Federal marshals transported her directly from jail for the court-ordered restitution hearing. The metallic clink of restraints echoed through silence as she shuffled to the defendant's table. I had spent 3 days preparing my presentation with military precision. Sarah Rodriguez helped organize evidence into a timeline that made Margaret's crimes undeniable. The projector displayed enlarged copies of forged documents, fake invoices, and her own spreadsheet listing neighbors as targets. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, voice steady with confidence. For the past 5 years, you've been living under organized crime disguised as neighborhood governance. Murmurs rippled through the room as slides advanced. Forged signatures beside authentic ones. Bank records showing HOA funds diverted into personal accounts. Insurance claims for repairs that never happened. Payments to her brother's company for imaginary work. This woman didn't just steal from me. I continued. She systematically targeted every vulnerable resident in this community. Mrs. Patterson stood up, voice shaking with anger. Margaret charged me $1,200 for roof repairs that never happened. When I questioned it, she threatened fines. Tom Harrison followed, posture rigid with Marine discipline. She tried to foreclose on my house while I was deployed to Iraq. One by one, victims spoke. Garcia family, Johnsons, Williams couple. Each story peeled away another layer of Margaret's false respectability. She sat at the table looking like a broken doll. Designer clothes wrinkled, makeup smeared, eyes hollow. Federal prosecutor David Park took the podium. Mrs. Whitfield has been charged with 17 federal felonies, including mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and targeting deployed military personnel. The crowd murmured as he detailed the plea agreement. 15 years federal prison. 5 years supervised release. Asset forfeiture, including her home and car. Lifetime ban from HOA leadership. Additionally, Park continued, this case has prompted congressional hearings on HOA oversight and new federal protections for deployed military families. Margaret's third attorney stood to read her statement. Mrs. Whitfield accepts responsibility and apologizes to the community. I looked directly at her as she was forced to stand. Her confident smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow expression of someone who bet everything and lost. Margaret, I said quietly, voice cutting through the tension. You thought stealing from a deployed soldier was easy money. You believed I couldn't fight back from Afghanistan. The room fell silent. You forgot soldiers don't abandon their brothers. You mess with one of us. You mess with all of us. And now the whole country knows what happens when you target military families. Applause started slowly, then built into thunder that shook the walls. Margaret was escorted away in handcuffs while an entire neighborhood watched the collapse of her suburban dictatorship. With open relief, justice had landed with the accuracy of a precision strike. 6 months later, I stood in my completely rebuilt kitchen, sunlight pouring across the counters as I watched the Rodriguez kids chasing each other to their brand-new backyard across the street. Carlos had taken part of the restitution Margaret was forced to pay and purchased a house 3 blocks away, a modest ranch that finally belonged to his family instead of being another stolen asset in Margaret's schemes. Maria's hospital shift still took her past my place every morning, and she never failed to wave, smiling like we'd been lifelong neighbors instead of reluctant allies thrown together by crisis. The warm scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filled my home as I completed renovations that erased every trace of the violation Margaret had orchestrated. Brand new locks secured every door. An upgraded security system monitored every corner. And in the garage, the rhythmic clang of socket wrenches against polished chrome had replaced the bitter memory of strangers occupying my space. Margaret herself was serving time at Federal Correctional Institution Dublin, where rumors said her cellmate, a former corporate embezzler, found Margaret's endless complaints about injustice more amusing than sympathetic. News reports mentioned she spent hours in the prison library researching appeals destined to fail and writing letters to judges who would never respond. Her former house had been liquidated to help repay victims, eventually purchased by a young Marine couple who repainted the dull beige walls with bold colors that actually reflected personality and pride. The Lexus she once drove like a badge of superiority had been sold through a veteran-owned dealership, marketed with the slogan, previously owned by a federal criminal, now ready for someone who earned it. But the real victory wasn't Margaret sitting behind bars. It was what rose after her empire collapsed. The Deployed Heroes Housing Protection Fund I created using part of my restitution had already helped 12 military families across 3 states fight HOA corruption. Sarah Rodriguez left private legal practice entirely to run the organization full-time, offering pro bono representation to service members targeted by predatory associations. Congressional hearings triggered by Margaret's crimes led to the Military Family Protection Act. federal legislation mandating safeguards for deployed personnel, including grace periods for minor violations, protections against illegal rental takeovers, and enhanced penalties for anyone exploiting military families. Sunset Hills itself transformed from Margaret's personal kingdom into a genuine community. A new HOA board was elected with 90% resident turnout. Transparent accounting practices replaced secrecy. Mandatory audits and term limits ensured no future tyrant could take control again. Mrs. Fiona became secretary, channeling her investigative instincts into legitimate service. Tom Harrison took the presidency, his Marine discipline keeping meetings efficient and fair. I accepted the role of security coordinator, applying military planning to neighborhood watch programs that protected residents instead of intimidating them. The annual Heroes Day festival we launched quickly became a cherished tradition, honoring deployed service members, raising scholarship funds for their children, and providing resources for their families. The event took place in Margaret Park, formerly the Community Green, renamed unanimously so her legacy would remain a warning instead of fading into forgotten history. Local law enforcement agencies adopted our case as a training reference for HOA corruption investigations. Police academies throughout California began using Margaret's operation as a textbook example of organized fraud targeting vulnerable populations. A documentary crew that followed the story for 6 months premiered the HOA Wars at the Riverside Film Festival, with proceeds supporting veteran legal aid programs. Margaret's mugshot appeared prominently in promotional material, permanently tying her face to the consequences of exploiting military families. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on my porch with cold beer, watching neighbors walk dogs, kids ride bikes, and families enjoy the peaceful community Margaret once tried to dominate through fear. The low rumble of motorcycles from my garage blended with sounds of real neighborhood life. Barbecue chatter, pickup basketball games, distant laughter at children who finally felt safe in their own yards. Margaret declared war on one soldier and ended up facing an army. The lesson was simple. Some battles are unwinnable, especially when you choose the wrong enemy for the wrong reasons. 15 years in federal prison. That's the price Margaret paid for turning someone's deployment into her personal payday. What stands out most about this case is how deliberately she chose her victims. Military families overseas, elderly residents living alone, people she assumed couldn't fight back. She'd been running the scam for years because most homeowners don't want to spend weekends digging through county records. But Jake came home from Afghanistan, found strangers living in his house, and instead of exploding with rage, he started documenting everything. That fake 90-day abandonment clause Margaret kept quoting, it never existed. Jake proved it with the original 1987 HOA bylaws. And when Margaret tried planting drugs in his garage at 3 a.m, she forgot one important detail. Combat veterans know exactly how to set up surveillance cameras. The truth about bullies is they only hold power as long as people allow it. Margaret forgot that some fights simply can't be won. Ever dealt with someone who thought their tiny piece of authority made them untouchable? Share your story in the comments. And if you want more cases where preparation beats intimidation, hit subscribe, because there are Margarets running HOAs all across America, and every one of them eventually learns the same lesson.